You know, if you go to Beijing today, you can't miss him. His massive portrait is hanging right there, over the Gate of Heavenly Peace in Tiananmen Square. Mao Zedong. He's the founding father of the People's Republic of China, and honestly, one of the most gigantic and controversial figures of the entire 20th century. To get a handle on the China we see today, we've got to understand the man who made it. So, let's try to unravel the story of Mao.
And this, right here, is the question at the heart of it all. It's the one that still splits people right down the middle. Was he the visionary founder who dragged China into the modern world? Or was he a brutal tyrant whose policies killed tens of millions of his own people? The truth? Well, it really depends on who you ask.
And this really lays out the whole paradox, doesn't it? On one side, you have the man who unified a shattered country, kicked out foreign powers, and brought literacy and healthcare to the masses. But on the other side, you have a totalitarian ruler, mass repression, and policies so catastrophic they led to suffering on a scale that's just hard to even wrap your head around. So how can one person's legacy be both of these things at the same time?
All right, so here's our game plan for figuring this out. We're going to start with that paradox. Then we'll look at his rise from nobody to revolutionary leader. We'll see how he started building a new China, and then we have to get into the two most devastating parts of his rule, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And we'll finish up by looking at his incredibly complicated legacy.
Okay, first up, the Mao paradox. Let's really dig into this. How can a man be both a national hero to millions and a monster to millions of others? This question is the absolute key to understanding modern China. So let's get into his story. Mao wasn't born into some powerful family, no way. His journey from a farmer's son in the countryside to the absolute ruler of the most populous nation on earth, well, it's a wild story of rebellion, smarts, and just sheer relentless drive. He was born into a China that was basically falling apart. By 1921, he was helping found the Chinese Communist Party. But the moment that really made him the guy was the Long March. It was this absolutely brutal, year-long military retreat that somehow cemented his control over the party. After fighting for decades, his side finally won. And in 1949, he was the one standing in Tiananmen Square declaring the birth of a whole new country.
This quote from him, from way back in 1927, it tells you everything you need to know about his thinking. He's making it crystal clear. This isn't about polite debate or gentle reform. He believes revolution is, by its very nature, violent. And that one idea, that real power comes from force, is going to guide him for the rest of his life.
All right, so it's 1949, and Mao is in charge. His government gets to work immediately. And in these early years, he rolled out a bunch of reforms that form the good side of his legacy, the things his supporters still point to today.
And you can't argue, some of these were huge deals. Land was taken from the wealthy and handed to poor farmers. They launched massive campaigns to teach people how to read and to improve basic health. Women's rights were dramatically improved, and opium addiction, which had been a plague on China for a century, was basically wiped out. You have to imagine, if you were a regular person who'd only known war and poverty, this felt like real, amazing progress. This is where the hero story comes from. But, and it's a massive but, that progress came with a horrifying price tag. In 1958, Mao launched a radical plan to remake China overnight. It was called the Great Leap Forward, and it would become one of the deadliest man-made disasters in all of human history. The goal itself was just breathtakingly ambitious. See, Mao was impatient. He thought China could just skip decades of slow development and, basically through sheer willpower, become an industrial giant. He actually said they'd produce more steel than Britain in just 15 years. It was this vision of a total national transformation, like right now.
But the way they tried to do it was a complete disaster. They banned private farms, they forced peasants into these huge, inefficient communes, and then millions of them were told to stop farming and start making steel in these little homemade backyard furnaces. Most of the steel was totally useless. It was a plan based on pure ideology, ignoring all the basic facts of farming and economics.
So what happens when millions of farmers stop farming? The result was grimly predictable: famine. The Great Chinese Famine killed an estimated 30 million people. Just let that number sink in. 30 million. It's a scale of death that's almost impossible to comprehend, and it was the direct result of this one terrible policy.
Now, after a failure that massive, Mao's power was shaky.
So to get back on top and get rid of his rivals, he launched something even more chaotic in 1966, the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution.
Officially, the goal was to purge China of old, bourgeois ideas and get that revolutionary fire going again. But in reality, it was a brutal power grab. Mao basically turned the nation's youth into a weapon, set them loose on his enemies, and plunged the entire country into a decade of pure chaos.
He gave millions of students, called the Red Guards, permission to go wild. Their mission was to attack anyone in authority and destroy the four olds: old culture, old ideas, you name it. Teachers, intellectuals, even party members were publicly humiliated, beaten, and sometimes killed. Ancient temples were destroyed, priceless artifacts were smashed. Society just broke down. The estimated death toll? Somewhere between 750,000 and 1.5 million people.
Mao died in 1976. He left behind a country that was completely transformed, but also deeply traumatized. So how does a nation come to terms with that? How do they remember a man who was responsible for both building their modern nation and for mass death? The official answer is fascinating.
The Chinese Communist Party actually has an official ruling on Mao. And it's a simple formula. He was 70% right and 30% wrong. It's their way of acknowledging his, quote, mistakes, like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. But the formula makes it clear that, in the end, his achievements as a nation builder were more important. And this is the official story that's taught all across China.
And that official verdict leads to this huge split in how he's seen. Inside China, for many, he's still the great hero who made China strong and independent. I mean, his face is on every single piece of their money. But in most of the rest of the world, people focus on that 30%, the famine, the purges, the insane human cost. He's often put in the same category, not as a nation builder, but as a dictator like Stalin.
And that leaves us right back where we started, with this really unsettling question. As China's power grows in the world, its origin story, and the man at the center of it, matters more than ever. Can you separate the good from the bad? Was he a nation builder, a mass murderer, or was he somehow, impossibly, both? This debate over who he was, it's not over. It's a living argument about power, progress, and the price of revolution. And we are a long, long way from the final answer.